Maybe I'll start with you, Oren. Talk a little bit about some of the work that Gnosis Guild did in pulling together your portion of the overall architecture that came together with and on mainnet for the unlocked DAO, and then have it propagate over some bridges, over some Connext bridges to some of the other places, and how some of the tooling that your team worked on fits into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe a bit of a backstory here. Well, the Gnosis Guild team had originally spun up to help facilitate uh, setting up the Gnosis DAO, and did this kind of wholesale review of a bunch of the different DAO tooling that was out there, and decided that none of it really checks the boxes that we wanted. One of them was we very much wanted something that was kind of composed of small, relatively easy to reason about components that could kind of be swapped in and out over time as the organization grew. And so this kind of insight led us to developing a standard that we call Zodiac, which was really just use the safe as its prototype account, the safe module manager interface as the key interface for what we made then as a standard. Um, and essentially what it does is just that you have an avatar, like I say, so an avatar is a kind of on-chain representation of an account. Have an avatar and plug any number of module contracts into that avatar to modify how it behaves. And so this has let us do things like roles for different accounts and very tightly scope what those accounts are allowed to do. It allows us to do things like Oracle-based governance, where you have proposals and snapshots that use an Oracle like UMA or reality.eth or Chorus to um, to resolve what the snapshot space said should happen and autonomously have that happen on chain. Um, Possibility to have between networks and then an avatar for that organization on another network. So an organization can control arbitrarily many accounts on arbitrarily many networks using this sort of modular setup, and essentially create a constellation of accounts that represent the organization as a whole, which is where the name Zodiac for the standard drew its inspiration from. And so in our case, how we contributed to this effort was obviously in designing and implementing the standard, and then designing some of the components that are used as part of the setup to allow an organization on one side to control an account on another side of a bridge between two networks.
When we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, what it what it sounds like is happening is a proposal gets created in the DAO, and then goes across a Connext bridge, and then through the combination of Zodiac and a safe that sort of catches those new bits of instructions for the DAO, and then figures out when, if and how they get implemented. Is that close? And is that
Yeah,
what
that's
that
super cool.
component?
That's so. I mean, maybe a high level overview of like the flow of a transaction there would be, yeah, you've got this proposal that gets created in the DAO. If say your DAO is wanting to call some function on, uh, let's say call a mint function on some NFT contract, right? If that contract's on the same network as the DAO, then the DAO just calls the NFT contract's address directly, calls the mint function, and that's kind of what you have to encode in the proposal. But in the case that the NFT contract is over on some other network, so you live uh, on an L2 somewhere, you live on Gnosis chain, you have governance there, so it's cheap, but you want to go back to mainnet to mint this mainnet NFT. Now you have to route your transaction through a bridge and understand kind of how to wrap your call data. So rather than calling the NFT contract directly because it's on a different network, you're now calling the entry point on the bridge contract. So in this case, Connext, we're calling the Connext contract, calling an entry point there where we basically pass in the transaction payload that we want to get bridged across and ultimately executed on the other side. Passing over the bridge is a call to a Zodiac module. You'll be calling this exec transaction from module function on your Zodiac module, and then that will be connected into a safe, and then that safe is what will ultimately call the NFT contract on the other end. And so the Zodiac module there essentially just validates that the call data came from the correct network, came from the correct contract on the destination network, on the origin network, make sure that it was originally called by the DAO contract. It does all of the checks and validation. If that all passes, then passes the payload onto the safe for execution.
Arjun, I'm going to throw it over to you, and then Julian, I got a question for you after that. All of the bridging components, Connext is a key portion of how that's working. Can you share a little bit about how in this architecture Connext fits in and talks to either things on the on the original DAO side or on the receiving end, how it connects up with the work that Oren and the Gnosis Guild team did on Zodiac and the safe side of things?
Yep. Giving this one more try. Let's see if I hope it's not echoey again.
It's perfect.
Loud.
It's perfect now. Thank you.
No,
amazing.
Yep. No echo.
Not quite sure what was happening earlier here, but yeah. So basically, Connext is layers on top of canonical bridges. That's kind of how we do messages between chains. We act as like an optimistic system that like falls back to the underlying rollup bridge or other canonical bridge. We just like use whatever is the most secure option. And by doing that, I think we like our whole goal is that we want to try to minimize the additional risks that are put onto projects that are building across chains that go beyond, the things that they've already bought into. So like, if you're building on Optimism, you've bought into the security model of the Optimism rollup bridge, fundamentally, and there's no way around it. And so ideally, the best possible security that you can give a system that's built across chains that's supporting Optimism is to just have it only rely on the security of that bridge as much as possible. The way that like Connext kind of handles the transactions that are coming through Zodiac is that we treat these as what we call like authenticated transactions. So there's a notion in our system where if you have like a protocol level interaction, like something that's coming from a DAO, that's something that requires you basically need the contracts on the target chain to know who is sending a message on the source chain. So in this case, you need to know and restrict that this message is only coming from a DAO. And so because it's an authenticated message, all of this ends up going basically as close to the canonical bridges as we can really make them go on our side. And then so Connext, like when you trigger this interaction with Zodiac, what happens is that the DAO, in this case Unlocks DAO, votes on a proposal, submits that proposal to chain, and that proposal will itself will like wrap the data for interacting with whatever contract you want to interact with in a call to Connext. We call these X calls. It'll wrap it inside of an X call. Connext will take that data, basically send it across chains using over the canonical bridges, and then execute that data against the Zodiac module on the target chain. Zodiac will verify that the data did indeed correctly come from the DAO that it was supposed to. And then of course, if there's any other additional checks, like for example, a delay or scope guard or things like that need to happen, that's where it would happen. That's where like those pieces would occur as well. And then lastly, Zodiac will then make the transaction happen within the target chain safe. So your NFT mint, as Aaron mentioned, would basically then happen as this like final step.
Outstanding. So this is how these various piece parts fit together. So Julian, would love, from your standpoint, just kind of zooming out, how the different aspects of the Unlocked DAO have been set up, where are the different places where these things need to stay in sync, what were some of the challenges uh, that really drove the need to build this out. And then also while we're doing this, definitely want to reach out to the folks in the audience, and especially for some interested in your thoughts, if you either want to jump up or if folks have questions they want to drop in the chat for the group as well, because this is fairly new stuff and highly complex stuff. And as things get more decentralized, as we get into a world where there are a quazillion L2s out there, these types of architectures are going to become more and more common.
Absolutely, and I would start with this. Like I think at this point, everybody on this call is probably aware that we're not going to have a single chain. We will likely have I don't know if it's 1,000, 10,000, a million L2s, but I think the plan for the Ethereum community is to scale via these L2s, and so that means there are different kind of execution environments. And yet, if we want to avoid kind of complete fragmentation of having 10,000 chains with all different implementation of the same protocols, we need to find a mechanism, and that's really the problem that we had. We need to find a mechanism to govern across chains. Have one, say, canonical, and I'm putting air quotes here because I think it can change in the future, but like one canonical DAO on one chain, and the DAO is basically the place where people that govern will govern, and then be able to kind of execute transaction in a cross-border, in a cross-chain way. And so for us, that was really kind of what the challenge that we tried to solve. I am pretty convinced deeply that it's going to be, the same challenge for every single protocol, but maybe every single DAO eventually. There is no, our job at Unlock is not to choose where people are going to deploy their membership contract. If you want to do that on Optimism, go ahead and do it. If you want to do that on Polygon, go ahead and do this. If you want to do that on, Avalanche or BNB or other more controversial chains, go ahead and do that. It's not my choice as the creator of the protocol to tell you where you should go. Because the point of these protocols is to bring standardization and kind of normalization of the behavior. And so really the challenge that we have is like, okay, how can we, in a trustless manner, obviously, govern on mainnet where our DAO is, and at some point we can move it to some other chain, and have these these decision cross jurisdiction, move to Optimism, Arbitrum, Celo, Avalanche, any of the network that we currently support, and then eventually every single network that we support. And so there's two different aspects here. It's like the aspect of the bridge, and that's where obviously Connext comes into play. How do we have these messages pass through the bridge and arrive on the other side? And then the aspect on the other side of what it would qualify kind of trust or provenance verification, as well as maybe what I would call belt and suspenders, like ways to kind of make sure things are happening right. And that's where what Safe, the Gnosis Safe, the Multisig, and specifically I'd say the Avatar approach has been helping us with. One of the so basically that's exactly how we build this. Again, with the precious help of both the Gnosis Guild, who worked on Safe, as well as Connext. You were asking, Chris, about the decision. So we didn't change any of the parameters on the DAO on mainnet. We have a 6-day, if I'm correct, proposal delay. So whenever a proposal is submitted, people have 6 days where they can observe the proposal, I'd say. After this, there's a voting period of a week. And then after this, we have if I'm correct, a 3-day time lock cooldown period. After this, the transaction gets executed, crosses the bridge. Then Connext does its magic to have the transaction go through the bridges. It takes, from a couple hours to a couple minutes to a couple hours. And eventually it reaches the local multisig wallet. And I say multisig, but down the line, we might actually completely remove the idea of the multisig and just use the Safe as this, recipient of this transaction. And then they sit again in a time lock there. And that's really critical for us. And I'll explain why we do that logic. And after this, I think it's 2 days, Clément can confirm this, on this time lock, it will go and execute on the local unlock contract. The reason why we have this time lock on the local chain, so inside of as a Zodiac module, is to avoid the situation where, for some reason, and hopefully this will never happen, but I think there's, I mean, at least in some chains, there's a risk. If there's a, any kind of compromission at the bridge level, the local multisig can stop any transaction from happening. I realize, and as much as everyone else, that this is not ideal in terms of solution, because that creates kind of a a middleman or a gatekeeper situation where we could block a transaction to happen. At the same time, we really want to avoid a situation where if this gets compromised, basically the local chain unlock implementation is screwed. So there's a 2-day period during which the signers on the multisig can just rally up together and then stop a transaction from happening by just submitting a transaction of a similar announce. And so that's kind of the belt and suspender that I talked about earlier. Does that answer your question, Chris?
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, just there's, this world as we, as it starts to collide from the, sort of the aspirational conversations we've all been having around DAOs for the last several years, colliding with the reality of a very complex real world. These are some of the things that we're going to need to be thinking about, and, finding that right balance point between absolute, sort of pure platonic decentralization and a little bit of pragmatism as these things are getting built is something that we definitely need to think about. Oren and Arjun, I'd like to throw it back to you. What are some of the cool things you learned, or what were some of the surprises, or what were some of the other sort of aha moments as you were building on this over the past couple of months?
So I actually want to call out something, and this is a little bit related to your question, but Julian, I think there's a couple of things that you touched on which are really, really cool that are worth highlighting here. So the first is, I totally, obviously it's amazing to see that you share this vision of like DAOs needing to really be completely chain agnostic and needing to be able to interact with the protocols wherever they live. I think that's been one of the most awesome things working with you guys is that you're so much further ahead in terms of thinking here than most other folks, and you've identified this like key problem that is really just going to be one of the biggest issues for the space. So it feels like we're kind of in on a secret that nobody else really knows yet with Zodiac and this approach. But even beyond that, I think something that's really interesting here is that like projects are trying to solve this today, and the way that they solve this today is basically like using a safe. They go and deploy a multisig on each chain, and then they use that multisig as like an admin multisig. They have the DAO vote on things on Ethereum, and then they use the admin multisig to actually like make the votes happen on every other chain. And even if you're not a DAO yet, even if you're at a pre-DAO stage, you're still kind of doing something similar. We're using like admin multisigs everywhere. One of the things that I think is like maybe most interesting about Zodiac, and this is something that like just by the way, the Connext DAO also uses Zodiac. We have like a fully chain agnostic governance system. We're obviously super bullish on the Zodiac framework as well, and I think that this was the approach that we followed. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting about Zodiac is there is a very, very seamless transition path from being a totally centralized organization that is where you're running your pre-token, you're running your like protocol out of just multisigs, and you have like an admin multisig on each chain, to starting from there to you have a full DAO living on one chain that is now like completely seamlessly interacting with protocol contracts living on every other chain. And I think the fact that you can go from point A to point B without actually, at least the way that Zodiac works today, basically without ever actually changing your multisigs or really anything else, is incredible. So like what we did, for example, on our side was we started out having a safe on every chain to kind of control the protocol as an admin contract. When we launched the Connext DAO, we upgraded the safe that lives on Ethereum into becoming basically the DAO. We did this by like installing the Open Zeppelin kind of governor module within Zodiac, and then also adding support for voting via snapshot in the OSNAP module. And then we took our existing admin safes on every other chain, and we turned those into avatars in the Zodiac framework, and installed Connext mods on all of them. And so we went from, again, without ever changing any of the actual addresses or anything like that in our protocol contracts, we went from being like having everything be owned by the team to having everything be owned in like a totally decentralized way by the DAO in literally a matter of days. It was insane. And I believe Unlock had you guys had a similar situation where you just took your existing safe infrastructure that you're already quite familiar with and just upgraded it.
Yeah, we did that exactly. We did that on all of the sidechains. We had the DAO on mainnet, and the main contract on mainnet was already controlled by the DAO. But indeed, on the sidechain, we went initially with the multisig approach. We're using a regular safe, and we've added the Zodiac modules exactly like you described. I think for us, the next step is to either remove the signers on the multisigs, but again, trying to be very cautious about this because it's kind of a one-way street, or eventually adding more. I'm not sure what that looks like or how that looks like, but like finding a mechanism to just say, hey, we're not going to be the only signers. Right now, it's the team, which is a fair point of centralization, but eventually have other signers here. And for me, one of the ideas, like at some point, there should exist in our space some kind of DAO superheroes, or I don't know what you call this, but like people that are across multiple DAOs, kind of signers or people that can help do recovery that would obviously have a very, very strong hygiene in terms of private keys and stuff like this, but that could act as these saviors when there is something broken. I know there's a bunch of attempts around security here. I do think around governance that similar things could exist.
Yeah, so that's actually exactly what we did. Was we replaced our team ownership. So we didn't want to. We're in a similar situation where we didn't want to like completely remove signers on both the DAO multisig and also the avatars on each chain, just in case, there's like something that goes wrong and we need to have some ability to like block a transaction or some ability to like push something, especially in our case where like, there's there's one particular challenge in our case, which is like if we want to run protocol upgrades and we want to do them across chains, we would need to run protocol upgrades using our own protocol, which is quite interesting. And so we want to make sure that we think we can do it, which is really awesome. We could basically like have the DAO vote to upgrade our protocol contracts on other chains and have that protocol upgrade instructions go through, and like the deployment of the new contracts actually go through our own message bridging mechanism. And then at the target chain, when it arrives, like it like executes and then upgrades everything in real time, which is kind of crazy. But even like we obviously want to like, we don't want to do that until we're absolutely certain it's going to work, and you definitely don't want to do something like that in a way where like you're locking yourself into a certain kind of like system where there's no recourse. And so we've done something similar. What we did was we removed all of the like team owners of the multisig, and we instead installed a security council. In our case, this is like a 12-person council of very prominent people throughout the space. They're all like technical people who have a lot of experience being on like very, very high security multisigs. It includes people like, Gonzalo is the founder of Consensus Diligence. It includes Aaron. It includes, Greg, who's the founder of ChainSafe. It includes Anurag who's previously at Polygon. So these are visible enough people where it's like if something goes wrong, you know who to talk to, and also it's also like a bunch of people who we have really great relationships with. And then right now, the role of the security council is like act as this kind of fail-safe mechanism where, if there's like admin level things that need to happen, the security council can help both, like push those through. Admin level things that need to happen that we just don't fully feel comfortable sending through like the default pathway. But in the future, what we're going to do, and this is again kind of a testament to like the progressive decentralization approach. First things, like what we're first going to do is maybe starting in a few months, once we build some more comfort around this, install the Zodiac scope guard module. And so by doing that, we'll basically scope guard the security council such that they can no longer make do arbitrary things from the DAO or from the avatars, but they can block transactions. And then after that, in the future, once we continue to build more comfort, we'll eventually get to the point where we can then remove the security council altogether. I think that like level of, it's just like progressive decentralization is such an important thing. And like there is quite literally no framework that I've ever seen that actually enables it in such an incredible way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this. Like this was one of the huge motivations for building Zodiac the way that we did, and enabling those very small incremental steps kind of towards decentralization. The huge switching costs that have kind of previously existed in moving from one type of account to another, as in like moving all of your tokens, updating all of the contracts that you have roles in, and updating kind of external references that you don't control. These huge switching costs are huge costs. It's a massive burden on time and gas costs and coordination costs. But then also the idea of just a kind of a trapdoor, right? You go through it and you can't go back is really, really hard to swallow, especially for kind of novel systems where you can't be entirely sure up front how it's going to behave once you put it into the wild. And so being able to kind of but still have an opportunity to hop back out if things go wrong, I think is a really important feature for just allowing projects, allowing protocols to mature at a pace that's kind of a good, I don't know, a good happy medium between speed and comfort.
We'll do bugs, hypothesis will change, and you want to make sure that you have ways to change things. And what matters is not so much immutability, that accountability, that the rules to change things are transparent, available to everyone in a way that lets you make progress without actually giving too much power to someone. I think for me that's one of the big misconception in our space, where it's like, oh, everything needs to be completely immutable, never ever change. It's like, yeah, I'd much rather something where it's accountable, where changes are possible and done in the right way, rather than binary, which is Mark can press the button and change anything he wants, and Mark is actually the name of a real person. Or on the other side, nobody can ever change anything, which is not realistic. We're just people, and the world is changing. Our whatever we're doing will change in the future, which is why I think governance and upgradability / accountability are really important.
Yeah, I think the accountability and whether we call it transparency or audit ability, can see what have those changes been over time as well, and see how these different models and communities and governance systems have evolved over time as well.
Absolutely. One question for you both, Arjun and Oren. Is there a world in which at some point, and I suspect this is kind of wild and crazy, but a DAO could send cross-chain governance decision in a counterfactual way? So saying, hey, we'll just send these messages through a bridge to somewhere. That somewhere might not exist yet, but when it exists, then it should execute certain things. So almost like our DAO, we're on 14 networks right now. I know only, the bridge limitation right now only means that we are technically decentralized on 5 of these networks. But eventually there's going to be 1,000 L2s. Can we just build things in a way that these messages are sent some way to the bridges, even though there's nothing on the other side? But when there is something on the other side, all of a sudden this gets executed in a way that would be transparent and permissionless. Is that something that is eventually doable?
Yeah, so this is actually, it's funny that you mentioned this. This is actually kind of how our system works currently. As you may know, we built basically like a UI ourselves on top of all of this, just as a way to like simplify the process of like proposal creation. Because I think the second step from making all this functionality work is that in order to make it usable, you need to have like a transaction builder or something like that that can work across chains. So we built that. We built a little widget for it, which is just still like in a somewhat early stage. And I think that Aaron is taking that forward, and like the Zodiac team is working on turning that into something that's like much more fleshed out in like the snapshot and safe UIs. But the way that we handled it in our case was like, we didn't want to make any assumptions about whether or not the user would even have a safe on the target chain. And so what we would do is just like if the user, we just have the user like specify a transaction that they want to build against the target chain, and then like a pre-configured safe on the source chain. And then we would scan all of the like deployed safes that were associated with it on other chains or on the target chain. And if there wasn't anything deployed, we would just bundle all of it into a safe transaction. And so all of it just gets deployed at the same time. So like you deploy the safe using create2 to a deterministic address. We can calculate that address up front. We know that then once it's deployed, we can now execute a transaction against it, and then do whatever it is that needs to happen on the target chain with that transaction. And all of that can be bundled into a single interaction that's actually sent through Connext. So there's no reason why you can't just take that a step further and say, okay, for the unlock protocol, you can just set a restriction that like, a simplifying assumption would be saying something like, okay, you know that you're going to keep your deployer keys the same on each chain, or that the quote unquote deployer key in this case is always going to be that is deterministically deployed. And so as long as the address of the safe that is deployed on each chain is always the same, you always know that the address of the contracts that will be deployed from that safe, or the first contract that will be deployed from that safe, will always be the same as well. And so you can always know before it ever happens that the deployment address of the unlock protocol on each chain will always be right, so long as it goes through the same process through like the Connext and Zodiac framework.
I don't
and then.
Oh, Arjun, I don't know if you saw my question in the chat, but like this is exactly what we want to have with one caveat. The deployer key, could these be the actual DAO on mainnet in a way that, okay, well, whenever there's a network that needs to be deployed, it happens through governance on mainnet in a way that exactly that you said is predictable. Like using create2, the address would always constantly be the same, and only the DAO can actually deploy at that address across networks. So
the DAO address would be determined based on the safe address. That would be the deployer. The safe address would be determined based on, so this is one thing that I actually might need Aaron's help with is, I don't know if safe uses create3 or not, I don't know if to what extent we have the ability to kind of control that address and make sure that it's always programmatically unique. But ideally, if there's like some sort of salt or something like that can be provided by the DAO as part of the cross-chain message, then that helps a lot.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways that I think this type of thing could be enabled. So from the safe's point of view, the safe factories always end up at the same address. They have an interesting mechanism for that, or I should say the safe master copies always end up at the same address. Basically what they've done there is they've pre-signed a bunch of transactions for every single kind of network ID up through to like tens of thousands or something like that. And so you can always replicate all of the same and publish those transactions. So anyone can broadcast those transactions whenever a new network ID is occupied by a new network. So the safe contracts always end up at the same address. The question there, one of the kind of questions there is whether or not the bridge endpoint that you'd be interacting with would always end up at the same address as well. Assuming that's the case, then yeah, you could certainly have a scenario where on mainnet where your DAO lives, you have a contract that you interact with that basically the only parameter that changes is the network ID. And so you call this endpoint and it tries to route a transaction over the Connext bridge to this new network ID. If that new network ID exists, then the transaction goes through, everything is all deployed, and now the DAO has a new avatar on this new network. If that network ID does not exist in Connext, then presumably the transaction reverts and nothing happens. So yeah, I could definitely see something like this happening, or something like this being possible, where you probably don't even need the DAO itself, or there's two versions of this. One where you could just have that as a public function anyone can call, so the DAO automatically gets a new avatar on every new network that there's a route from mainnet to that network via Connext. Or you could have it where it's scoped so only the DAO can call it, in which case DAO needs to make a proposal to explicitly deploy its stuff over on this new network.
This is fantastic, and I mean, I'm pretty going too fast here, but I recently reread a bunch of the vision around optimism and their kind of super chain approach. For me, this is the kind of pattern that they should build in right into the OP stack from that perspective, like thinking about how, when there's going to be many L2s, and I think we all agree that this is pretty the way to go at this point. They will need to come with a lot of tool built in to avoid everyone having to reinvent the wheel on every single network. And what you're describing here is something that I think should come out of the box. I don't know if this is something that you guys agree with, but feels like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm always surprised when new networks launch and they don't do things like just deploy the safe contracts themselves, because it's something that anyone can do. It's not something you need the safe permission to do. But I guess it's not immediately obvious maybe to folks, but it definitely feels like something that just out of the box before you announce your L2, you should have those contracts deployed, even if the front end for safe isn't supported there yet.
Absolutely, and I mean,
Awesome.
obviously for safes, but I would argue like for bridges as well. And Arjun, I'm sure this is something that you can work on. But even stuff like wrapped ETH, and there's a bunch of primitives on every single chain that need to earn wrapped ETH or wrapped native tokens, I guess, that should exist for every single other protocol to be deployed easily. My goal is to eventually get unlocked in the same situation, obviously, but we're already there. But that's what we're aiming for.
One last thought. Either thing you learned, thing you want to share. Arjun, I'll start with you as we're rolling through.
Awesome. Yeah. I guess I'll take a second to show Connext and then also a second to show Zodiac. So obviously Connext, is a more general cross-chain protocol. We want to, like, our whole goal is that we want to enable this interchain world that is happening, especially one that is centered around rollups, because we're very, very bullish on rollups. But enable this interchain world that's happening in a way where we're not making like very huge sacrifices on security. We're actually like retaining the core properties of blockchains that have made this whole space interesting and valuable and potentially world changing. And so if you're interested in cross-chain stuff in general, come talk to us or learn more about us. There's a lot of work that we're doing here, and there's a lot of open space to start building really interesting new primitives, things like Zodiac, that can fundamentally change the way that people think about and build in this space. And then I think beyond that, I would say, because I don't know if Aaron will end up shilling Zodiac, but I will shill Zodiac for him, because I'm just such a huge fan of the framework. I think it's genuinely a total game changer for DAOs. I'm speaking like as an organization that went through this extremely complex process to figure out how we should structure our DAO and like what is the right way to think about some of these problems. We've found that there really is just one answer, and that is Zodiac. There is really nothing else out there that gives you the level of flexibility that Zodiac does. And I think that we're getting close to the point where Zodiac will have soon like a more seamless like end-to-end UI driven experience for being able to do everything from like setting up your modules in your DAO to like controlling things at a more granular level, like building proposals, etc. And I think when that happens, I'm super excited for what that will mean for DAOs and DAO productivity. I would really love to get to the point where you no longer need to have a ton of devs involved in every like step of the DAO process in order to like build proposals and test them and things like that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And you can find out more about Connext at connext.network, connext.network, and can find things over there. Oren, over to you. What are your last thoughts?
I don't think I can follow Arjun, or I don't think I can add much to it. I really appreciate the wrap, Arjun. It means a lot. Yeah, I guess if you want to learn more, same thing. Go check us out at Gnosis Guild on Twitter, gnosisguild.org on the interwebs. And yeah, just really happy to have helped out in some way in kind of facilitating what Connext is doing, facilitating what Unlocked is doing, and hopefully just helping to improve the state of on-chain organizations.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you both for your work on this and your support. And Julian, going to give you the last word.
Absolutely. And so first of all, I want to thank Arjun and Oren. Sorry for mixing your names here. Very grateful for you guys to be here. Obviously, everybody here pretty knows of Unlock, unlock-protocol.com. I also want to shield something that we're going to launch very, very soon at advent.unlock-protocol.com. Fun little experiment for the end of the year. More fun than anything else. Please do expect to see some stuff happening here on Friday. In the meantime, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope we'll see you again next week.